И сейчас с нами на связи Даниил Гетманцев, председатель Комитета Верховной Рады Украины по вопросам финансов, налоговой и таможенной политики. Даниил Александрович, здравствуйте.
Добрый вечер, слава Украине.
Героям слава. Объясните, пожалуйста, что в реальности означает для предприятия переезд, с какими проблемами сталкиваются бизнесмены и как организован этот процесс?
Да, действительно, это наша совместная программа Комитета и Министерства экономики по релокации предприятий. Единственное, что хотел бы уточнить, что цифры у вас на начало апреля на сегодня немного другие. Больше 1700 предприятий у нас в работе. Из них уже переехало под 300, и половина из переехавших уже работает. Речь идет о том, чтобы сделать максимум для того, чтобы спасти те предприятия, которые могут быть остановлены в связи с боевыми действиями, в связи с агрессией. И, соответственно, чтобы эти предприятия создавали рабочие места, чтобы эти предприятия платили налоги, чтобы эти предприятия увеличивали валовый внутренний продукт. Вы знаете, достаточно пессимистичные прогнозы по ВВП Украины в этом году в связи с войной, в связи с агрессией. Мы боремся сейчас каждый день, каждую ночь, мы боремся за каждую сотую долю ВВП именно таким образом, ну и другими мерами, которые правительство применяет для того, чтобы экономика оставалась на плаву, экономика работала.
Скажите, а много желающих переместить свой бизнес за границу?
Смотрите, мы не занимаемся принципиально этими вопросами, мы не перемещаем бизнеса, мы спасаем нашу экономику, мы спасаем наших налогоплательщиков, тех, кто будет создавать места рабочие для переселенцев на Западной Украине, не только для переселенцев, а для всех. Поэтому это точно выходит за рамки нашей задачи, и если предприятие хочет переезжать за границу, это делает самостоятельно без нас.
Скажите, у вас есть цифры какие-то, может, совсем условные? Сколько предприятий государственных и частных может потерять Украина из-за войны?
Я должен согласиться с оценкой министра финансов, говорит о том, что это приблизительно 30%. Сейчас эта цифра уже меньше, потому что она была дана на тот период, когда под оккупацией находилась часть Чернявской, Сумской, Киевской, Житомирской областей. На данный момент мы имеем меньше цифру, но в любом случае экономика выходит и вышла уже. Вот это очень важно констатировать, что она уже вышла из того оцепенения, в котором она пребывала. Первые 2 недели войны мы перезапускаем предприятия по их местоположению, перемещение действий, их работе мешает военные действия или есть угроза захвата. То есть на самом деле размещаем государственный заказ для того, чтобы предприятие имело деньги на работу, на выплату зарплат, на свое существование, на свое развитие. Государственный заказ размещаем относительно той продукции, которая является товаром первой необходимости. Это в первую очередь мы очень расширили, кстати, государственный заказ вообще. И в этом и есть один из признаков перевода экономики на военный рельс. Мы ввели уникальную, практически прозрачную, очень простую систему налогообложения. Единый налог с оборота 2%, который заменяет НДС, налог на прибыль, освободили от налогообложения маленьких, и убрали любое административное давление для бизнеса. Кроме того, мы дали кредиты под 0%, до 60 миллионов гривен, особенно эти кредиты работают на посевной. И, соответственно, государство сделало все для того, чтобы экономика начала, во-первых, проснулась, во-вторых, начала развиваться и в мирных областях, и даже в тех областях, которые подвергнуты нападению.
Даниил Александрович, а уточните, вот как появление нового бизнеса в городе влияет на зарплате и на жизнь в регионе, куда переехал?
Не секрет, что наши западноукраинские области, они в контексте развития промышленности отставали от восточноукраинских. Это была умышленная такая заработка, ну и впоследствии оплаты налогов.
Спасибо вам большое. Даниил Гетманцев, председатель комитета Верховной Рады Украины по вопросам финансов, налоговой и таможенной политики, был в нашем эфире.
В правом углу экрана вы видите QR-код со ссылкой на реквизиты для оказания помощи украинцам, которые из-за войны вынужденно покинули свои дома. Вырученные средства будут направлены на решение гуманитарных проблем, связанных с войной, которую Россия развязала в Украине. Средства собираются на официальных счетах Министерства социальной политики в Национальном банке Украины. Собранные деньги будут потрачены на продукты питания и жилье для людей, которые из-за войны покинули свой дом. Вынужденные переселенцы и беженцы будут обеспечены лекарствами, одеждой, обувью, товарами первой необходимости, а также получат единовременную денежную помощь.
Преступления против культурного наследия. Российские оккупанты Украины уже уничтожили около 150 памятников, старинных усадеб и исторических зданий. Об этом сообщает Министерство Украины. Во многих городах такие объекты местные жители пытаются защитить название с песком и различными конструкциями. Как это делается в Воронеже? Давайте посмотрим.
Шаг за шагом и вокруг памятника Тарасу Шевченко появляется вот такой защитный каркас. Его установили, чтобы уберечь Кобзаря от возможных вражеских обстрелов.
Выдержит или нет? Выдержит. Оно выдержало, но не выдержит сейчас.
Несколько дней назад музейщики ДПС МХЛ создали специальный щит вокруг скульптуры Богдана Хмельницкого. Ребята помогают деятели культуры, спортсмены и другие небезразличные запорожцы. Успели укрепить уже с десяток скульптур.
Такий захист,
Такая защита выдержит некоторые негативные факторы и воздействия. Осколки, например, от снарядов, от пуль защищают.
и так далее.
Музейщики свой проект по сохранению достопримечательностей называют культурной обороной.
Это манифест нашего культурного наследия. О чем? О свободе, о независимости, о культурном развитии. Вот об этом мы защищаем смыслы нашей культурной жизни. Ведь вокруг чего война вся эта.
Работу по сохранению культурного наследия активисты проводят и в других городах Украины. Защитные конструкции вокруг достопримечательностей появились в Одессе, Львове, Харькове, Киеве. Впрочем, если скульптуры и витражи можно закрыть, то со зданиями, а также памятниками культуры сложнее. В Запорожской области известно о повреждении 3 исторических построек, но это только предварительные данные, сообщает глава профильного департамента.
На данный момент передають нам
Сейчас передают нам только предварительные данные. Фиксации произведут после победы. Россияне ведут войну против Украины как нации, а культура – это часть Украины, часть идентификации украинцев. И, собственно говоря, именно это и уничтожают вместе с людьми.
саме це і знищують.
В украинских городах и селах россияне бьют по старинным церквям, музеям, библиотекам. По данным Минкульта, более 2 десятков преступлений против культурного наследия зафиксировано в Чернигове. Фото и видеодоказательства этих злодеяний чиновники просят передавать в Министерство культуры. По предварительным подсчетам специалистов Украинского культурного фонда, с начала полномасштабного вторжения России в Украину оккупанты повредили или же полностью разрушили более 150 памятников.
И с нами на связи Екатерина Чуева, заместитель министра культуры и информполитики. Екатерина Евгеньевна, здравствуйте.
Добрый вечер.
Правда ли, что сейчас министерство ведет переговоры с западными партнерами по созданию общего фонда для восстановления нашего культурного наследия?
Да, действительно, это так, потому что Украине, безусловно, в сложившейся ситуации будет очень сложно самой восстанавливать собственными ресурсами такие объемы повреждений и утрат объектов культурного наследия, особенно принимая во внимание, что любые реставрационные работы стоят, как правило, гораздо дороже, чем новое строительство, если мы говорим о сравнительной стоимости, может быть, жилого фонда, да, обычного, современного, и реставрация объектов культурного наследия, которые требуют специальной квалификации, определенных команд специалистов, и, собственно, по всем государственным нормам расценки на реставрационные работы гораздо выше. Поэтому мы будем привлекать по возможности все возможные средства и ресурсы для того, чтобы сохранить эти объекты, отреставрировать, чтобы музеи могли восстановить свои экспозиции и так далее.
А кто же выразил готовность нам помочь? Какие страны?
Мы ведем переговоры с целым рядом стран. Я думаю, что будет корректно комментировать, собственно, тогда, когда уже помощь, собственно, будет приходить. Но министр культуры и информационной политики Александр Ткаченко ведет целый ряд переговоров с министрами и другими, с министрами культуры других стран, да, и с представителями, собственно, международных организаций по этому поводу. Поэтому пока это такая большая коммуникационная кампания, будем надеяться, что она принесет свои результаты.
Екатерина Евгеньевна, уточните, пожалуйста, и понятно ли уже, какие памятники утрачены безвозвратно?
Сейчас об этом сложно говорить, потому что на самом деле состояние объектов оценивается в несколько этапов, и будет на тех территориях, где это на сегодняшний день уже возможно, будет произведен, собственно, детальный осмотр, фиксация повреждений и оценка этих повреждений. И тогда будет понятно, подлежат ли какие-то объекты восстановлению и какие из них не подлежат, потому что это в значительной мере касается, например, состояния их, собственно, несущих частей, несущих конструкций. И тогда после вот этой детальной оценки и заполнения всех необходимых документов будет все это, можно будет сказать точнее. Потому что на сегодняшний день есть, безусловно, например, полностью сгоревшую деревянную церковь восстановить в первоначальном виде, безусловно, невозможно, уже хотя бы потому, что изначально исходный ее материал также погиб в огне. С памятниками из камня это бывает немножко проще, но все очень зависит от этого типа повреждений.
Скажите, вот на сайте Украинского культурного фонда появилась карта культурных потерь. Правда ли, что сейчас любой гражданин Украины может поучаствовать в составлении списка утраченного наследия, и что для этого необходимо сделать?
Действительно, все могут в этом поучаствовать, потому что та база данных, которую запустило Министерство культуры на своем сайте, и адрес ее тоже известен, мы всегда публикуем, наверное, уже во всех репортажах, во всех возможных обращениях по поводу культурного наследия, Culture Crimes Keep.gov.ua. Эта база может быть заполнена любым человеком. На самом деле там очень простая форма, которая предполагает некие персональные данные и, собственно, материалы об объекте. Название, фотографии, видео можно приложить. Любые персональные данные под надежной защитой, это не публикуется и не поступает в открытый доступ, но, собственно, сами материалы об объектах, после того, как специалисты проверяют эту информацию, верификуют, уточняют, верифицируют и уточняют, например, уточняют, там, является ли объект памятником по реестрам государственным или не является, и так далее. После этого информация, собственно, публикуется на сайте.
Welcome to another MedCram COVID-19 update. Today we're going to talk about this vitamin D paradox. Why is it that low
loss of drivers? This will be a huge problem for all of Europe. If Polish logistics are debilitated, it will impact the entire EU. It won't just be Polish shelves that will stay empty. There's no easing of the crisis in sight. The longer the war goes on, the likelihood of sanctions being imposed, including against Belarus, goes up. This put the Belarusian drivers out of work too, meaning even fewer trucks on Europe's roads.
Let's go now to some of the other global business stories making headlines. Japanese carmaker Honda says it will invest $40 billion into electric vehicles over the next decade. It plans to have 30 EV models at market by 2030. It currently has just one electric model available, putting it well behind rivals such as Tesla and Volkswagen. Construction has resumed in Denmark on a gas pipeline linking Norway with Poland. Work had been suspended due to environmental concerns. The Baltic Pipe project is due to be finished by the end of the year. Warsaw says when completed, the project will end Polish dependence on Russian gas. Well, the war in Ukraine isn't just playing out within the borders of Ukraine, but between computer networks on both sides. Russia's history of cyber attacks, think Georgia 2008, may be more well known, but Ukraine is showing it also knows how to make the most of its adversaries' network vulnerabilities, turning Russia's own game against it.
An army of hackers is taking warfare to a new frontier. Ukraine is fighting Russia's invasion in cyberspace too. Over 250,000 volunteers answered the call of the country's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov, and joined its IT army. Their aim to launch cyber attacks on Russia.
The kind of members that they have include sort of patriotic hacktivists, and the type of attacks they're doing, while they might be disruptive and sometimes embarrassing, so taking off, government websites offline, but they're not sort of a cyber war sort of declaration. I would say much more of an embarrassment.
The war in Ukraine is mainly being waged with physical weapons. Bombs are dropped on cities, and homes are being destroyed, causing people to flee. But beyond these highly visible attacks, others are also being carried out online by both sides.
When it's a cyber attack, we impact access to water, access to food, access to energy, access to healthcare. And that's what we are facing now in terms of risk of escalation.
The series of suspected Russian cyber attacks continues to this day. Everything from spyware to data phishing to digital attacks on infrastructure, including power plants. Military communications are being targeted too.
In essence, every tank, every aircraft is a computer par excellence, one that's also connected to a network. These devices alone contain masses of cyber technology.
Ukraine also uses social media to fend off Russia's attacks. Mikhailo Fedorov has been actively tweeting for peace. He asked Elon Musk for Starlink user terminals to keep Ukraine's internet up and running, and Musk delivered. Fedorov then called on companies to boycott Russia. Many have now pulled out of the country, causing huge economic damage.
The digital minister, Mr. Fedorov, has been quite active on Twitter and sort of pressuring CEOs of large companies to boycott Russian businesses.
Even though bombs cause more visible damage than computer viruses, traditional and cyber warfare can both have devastating effects.
And that's our show. You can find more stories on business in Ukraine and elsewhere around the world online at dw.com/business. I'm Stephen Beardsley. Thanks for watching.
Us along for the ride. It's all about the perspective, culture, information.
This is DW News
and more. DW, made for minds.
Portions of lunch are thrown out in the world right now.
Climate change is only half the story. This is my plastic waste from just 1 week. How much worse can it really get? We still have time to act.
I'm going all in.
This success. Hit subscribe for more videos like this.
People in trucks injured while trying to flee the city center.
More and more refugees are being turned away at the border.
Families fleeing bomb attacks in Syria.
Police crack down in Venezuela against demonstrators.
People fleeing extreme drought.
raft carrying 200 people has sunk in the Aegean Sea.
Around the world, more than 300 million people are seeking refuge. We ask why? Because no one should have to flee. Make up your own mind. DW. Made for minds.
This is DW News, live from Berlin. An attack at a New York train station injures at least 5. The shootings happened during the busy morning commute. Authorities are also said to have discovered undetonated explosive devices at the scene. Also on the programme, the battle for Ukraine's besieged port of Mariupol reaches a decisive stage. Ukraine's president warns Russia could use chemical weapons against a city already devastated by heavy bombardment and thousands of civilian deaths. Despite significant losses and setbacks, Russian President Vladimir Putin says his forces in Ukraine will prevail against what he describes as the anti-Russian enemy. I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the programme. We begin with breaking news from the United States, where at least 5 people have been shot and injured at a train station in New York. Fire department personnel also reportedly discovered undetonated explosive devices at the station. The incident occurred at the 36th Street station in Brooklyn during the busy morning commute. Let's join Bastian Hartig in New York. Welcome, Bastian. What more can you tell us?
Well, Phil, we just heard from an eyewitness who was apparently on that very subway car where this incident happened, and he described horrific scenes of panic in that subway car. Apparently, this smoke grenade went off on one end of the subway car, all the people scrambling to the other end of the subway car, and then the shots went off. Apparently, people lying in their blood as the subway was pulling into the next station, making it possible for people to get off. You mentioned several people injured. They've been brought to nearby hospitals. We have all kinds of law enforcement on the ground. We have New York Police Department, of course. We have the FBI, because as of now, the suspect, who is said to have worn some kind of construction vest, as maybe construction workers on the subway would, and also a gas mask, apparently, is still at large. Police, of course, looking for that suspect right now. It seems to be a male. You can be sure that they're looking at all kinds of CCTV footage and license plate readers to find out which path that suspect took, and to get away from that crime scene. And the danger, or the fear, of course, now, is this a lone shooter, or is this potentially part of some larger plot? Was this potentially a terrorist attack, Phil?
What is being said about these undetonated explosive devices that we hear were found?
Yeah, so first reports said that there were other devices. I mentioned the smoke grenade that went off, and there were reports that there were other devices, but the New York Fire Department now saying that they found more devices, but they were not active, so no active explosive devices at the scene right now. As far as we're hearing from the authorities, we don't know if this suspect might have other explosive devices with him, if he's planning to go to another location. What we do know, that this subway station in the south of Brooklyn, very much a working class residential area, people on their way to work this morning, not the kind of place that you would expect if you wanted to cause mass casualties, not the kind of place where you would where you would be likely to go. It's not Times Square. It's not one of the big train stations, Penn Station or Grand Central here in Manhattan. So there were people on the train, of course, but it wasn't a super busy day or situation on that train car, apparently. But what also has to be said, there, of course, at these neuralgic points in the city, as I mentioned, Times Square, for example, security has been stepped up considerably over the past weeks and months because there have been incidents at these places, recurring incidents. So this definitely a place where you would think that it wouldn't be as high, Phil.
Thank you so much for that, Bastian Hartig in New York. Turning to the war in Ukraine, Russia's assault on the besieged port city of Mariupol appears to be entering a decisive phase. US military analysts say Russian forces are nearly in full control of the city and closing in on trapped Ukrainian forces. Russia says it has killed or captured almost 100 Ukrainian troops attempting to escape overnight. Russian strikes have been pounding Mariupol for weeks, killing as many as 20,000 residents, according to the mayor. Civilians are expected to attempt to leave by car today along one of several negotiated humanitarian corridors. Capturing the port would give Russia complete control of the Sea of Azov's coastline and connect its forces in Ukraine's south and east. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Western countries are investigating allegations that Russian forces used chemical weapons in Mariupol. The claims, which Russia denies, come from Ukraine's Azov battalion, a military unit with far-right allegiances. President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned about their use.
One of the Russian occupiers' spokesmen said that they might use chemical weapons against the defenders of Mariupol. Treat this with the utmost seriousness. I would like to remind world leaders that the possible use of chemical weapons by the Russian military has already been discussed, and already at that time it meant that it was necessary to react to the Russian aggression much harsher and faster.
Well, DW correspondent Nick Connolly is in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. I picked up some of those items though with him and started with the situation in the city.
Well, as you can see, Kharkiv is basically a shadow of its former self. It's 5 p.m. here and it's totally empty. Just a few passers-by occasionally visible on the streets. Behind me, the regional government headquarters that was destroyed in a Russian missile attack right at the beginning of this war, and the Russian soldiers are still very close, within a few dozen kilometers of where I'm standing now. So unlike Kiev, where it feels like some kind of normality is returning, or where those Russian troops have withdrawn quite significantly in recent weeks, Kharkiv very much still on the front lines. Basically every couple of minutes you can hear some artillery in the background. It's often difficult to really work out where that is, but it does really bring home quite how close war is here. For now, still lots of people staying here. Not everyone has got out, but there is lots of speculation about whether Russia will now try and up its attempts to take Kharkiv as well as a kind of symbolic target, and expectation of more people trying to get out in a hurry in the days to come here.
Okay, and then down in the south in Mariupol, Russia seems to be intensifying its attacks there.
Indeed, and it seems, if the reports we're getting are true, that the remaining Ukrainian forces have been split in two, and now one of the main places they still are is a steelworks with lots of underground tunnels, lots of places to hide, and to hide from shelling and bomb attacks. So that was one of the reasons why we'd heard speakers for the pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk suggesting that chemical weapons be used as a way of trying to get at those Ukrainian soldiers, those Ukrainian troops still able to hide from the worst, the artillery. So that was really a sense now that they are trying to push home that advantage and to take Mariupol in its entirety as soon as possible, to free up troops to then be able to attack further north along a wider front in Donbass, in places where the Ukrainian army has been holding up pretty well in recent weeks.
And how credible are those allegations that Russian forces used chemical weapons?
Well, so far, we're just getting those reports from those Ukrainian battalions that are infected. They say a number of people were given medical treatment with stinging in their eyes, their throats. They were having problems breathing. It seems like no one has lost their lives in this alleged attack. but it doesn't surprise anyone. This is something that even the Western intelligence services have been preparing for, sending Ukraine large amounts of equipment to deal with chemical attacks, and after all now have to remember that the Russian general in charge of this war has previously been in charge of Russian forces in Syria, a conflict where chemical weapons were used against civilians. So there's definitely an expectation here that that is not off the table, and that this is something that could be used by the Russian side if they feel like they're not making progress fast enough.
Okay, thank you for that. Nick Connolly in Kharkiv. Dr. Alexander Keller is from the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg. I asked him about those claims that Russian forces had used a poisonous substance in Mariupol.
Good afternoon. Well, it is certainly in the realm of the possible, but as we've just heard from your colleague on the ground, the evidence is very sketchy so far.
Right. Investigators from the US and UK are said to be looking into this. How would they establish whether this was a chemical attack?
Well, generally speaking, this is extremely difficult from afar. One would have to get conclusive proof by conducting an on-site investigation during which samples would be taken. This would be environmental samples, biomedical samples from those people affected by the attack, and those samples would then have to be analyzed and compared to known chemical warfare agents to be really certain that this is what has happened.
So you would expect there to be viable samples still around?
Well, perhaps not of the warfare agent itself, but over the years and decades, those states possessing chemical warfare agents, chemical weapons, which have by now practically all been destroyed under international verification. Those states certainly also know how these chemical warfare agents degrade and what then to look for after a week or a month after such an attack.
War is inherently a terrible business. People get maimed or killed, lives get destroyed. What is it about chemical weapons that makes them apparently so much worse than conventional weapons?
Well, to start with, chemical weapons are prohibited by the Chemical Weapons Convention. They kill indiscriminately and on that basis alone violate the principles of international humanitarian law, the laws of war.
Right. So what is the likely international response if this is found out, if this is determined to have been a chemical weapons attack?
Well, I would expect, and we are already seeing it just at the mere possibility, that we would hear lots of condemnations, and rightly so, if this were proven to be a chemical weapon attack. I would expect more sanctions to be not only discussed, but also to be enacted. And I would hope that states, the international community, would make use of the legal instruments that are available to hold those responsible for this to account.
Because this idea of holding people to account for these sort of attacks has fallen somewhat into disrepute. Chemical weapons have been used in Syria, and no one has been held to account there. They've been used in attacks against enemies of Russia. In the United Kingdom, again, no one held to account. So beyond the condemnation, sanctions are already in place, and more sanctions are on the way. It's hard to see where Russia gets punished if this is found to be them using these prohibited weapons.
Well, holding perpetrators for such horrible crimes and violations of the laws of war to account is a long process. And probably not so much in the eye of the public. This process actually works quite well until Russia gets a chance to block it. Russia has blocked the work of the OPCW in The Hague, holding perpetrators in Syria to account. Russia has blocked those or similar efforts in the UN Security Council with its veto. So I think it would be a mistake to criticize these processes when it is only one culprit who blocks the process from being conducted until the end.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us and explaining that, Dr. Alexander Keller from the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy.
You're very welcome.
Our correspondent Rebecca Ritters has been to the regions of Zaporizhia and Dnipro in eastern Ukraine and talked to people who've heeded their government's warning to flee Mariupol as Russian forces refocus on Ukraine's southeast.
This was a supermarket parking lot before the war. Now it's the first place where people who've managed to flee Mariupol and other southern cities can breathe. At last, without fear. It's just 25 kilometers from the Russian forces who destroyed their homes and lives. More than 80,000 people have passed through here since Russia invaded. Most don't want to talk about what they've gone through. But Olga says life under occupation was impossible and evacuation was difficult too.
We registered to get out a while ago. We were waiting for around 3 weeks. We were waiting, and it turned out the Russians had stolen the evacuation buses.
We are seeking for...
People are also waiting for news of the disappeared. They leave notes for anyone who can help them find their loved ones.
Searching for wives, searching for father and mother.
Further north, the city of Dnipro, where even more people come to escape the fighting.
Dnipro is the main hub for people evacuating the south and southeast areas in the Donbass and Zaporizhia regions. Thousands of people have come through here already, and thousands more are expected in the coming days as the southeast region prepares for an intensified Russian attack.
They're also coming here shocked by what happened on the weekend in another train station just a few hours up the tracks. The rocket attack that killed 50 people, including children, in Kramatorsk as they were trying to flee. In Dnipro, the refugees, mostly women and children, have found relative safety. But the mayor is asking them to move on further west. There's no guarantee the war won't come here too. A war the men must stay behind and fight if they can.
My husband told me to leave him in the cellar and to go on my own. I said no. I will not leave you now. How could I leave you here to die? My husband didn't want to leave. He sent us away. He said if the Russians come, he would tear them apart.
Families are being torn apart too, as the battle for control of the east grows ever fiercer.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country's military campaign in Ukraine will continue until all of its goals have been met. Speaking after talks with his ally, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, Mr. Putin said the talks with Kyiv were at a dead end. He said Russia was withstanding what he called the blitzkrieg of Western sanctions and said that rising prices would put pressure on Western leaders.
We know that today our officers are taking part in a special military operation in Donbass in Ukraine, helping the Donbass People's Republics. They are acting bravely, professionally, and are effectively using the most modern weapons that have unique characteristics.
Let's take a closer look at that speech with Vladimir Esipov from DW's Russia service here in Berlin. Welcome, Vladimir. So, what we heard from Mr. Putin there sounds like a president trying to put a positive spin on a war that was supposed to be over quickly. What did you make of what he had to say?
Well, first of all, there is no such thing in the Russian public opinion as a war itself. So the word war is prohibited in Russia. They're talking about special military operation in the Ukraine, and it was a highly symbolic step for President Putin to invite Lukashenko to this space launcher station in the Russian Far East, because today is anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's first flight to the space. It's a very important day for Russia in terms of Russian soft power from the world. So it's a very, very strong signal for the Russian domestic public and for the foreign audience as well. So,
okay, let's hear another clip from the speech. Here's Vladimir Putin sounding quite